Hello, I'm Elizabeth Hepburn and I'm a rising junior at Duke. This summer, I worked with Dr. Frank Sloan to examine disparities in cognition and cognitive decline among US elderly. To put this issue in context, around 14% of people 71 and older in the US develop dementia. Many of the previous studies on this topic examine the link between education and overall cognition. However, our study aimed to examine cognition as well as cognitive decline and control for several factors such as income, race, and age to isolate the role of education. For our study, we used the Health and Retirement Study, a large longitudinal data set. 1998 was our baseline year, and we only included people who were 65 and older in 1998, meaning that our cohort was born between 1897 and 1933. At baseline, we used logistical analysis, and for cognitive trajectories, we use a Cox proportional hazard model. Now, examining baseline cognition in our first visualization here, we broke down educational attainment by different groups, and we examined how the cognitive quartiles were broken down in percentages by educational attainment. As you can see, people who obtained some graduate work or higher, 49% of them were in the top fourth quartile for cognition. Now, as compared to people who had less than a high school degree, only around 9% of them were in the top fourth quartile of cognition. This shows significant disparities between the levels of education at baseline and cognition. Now, moving to the visualization at the bottom here, we examined the rate of cognitive decline through hazard ratios. As you can see, with the red line at 1, that is the relative reference ratio for the group that obtained less than a high school degree. As you can see, for unadjusted education, not controlling for other factors, there was around half of the risk of cognitive decline for groups that obtained more than a high school degree as compared to those who obtained less than a high school degree. Now, when we add other factors such as race and income in the blue here, we see the relative risk go down slightly, but we still see statistically significant differences between those who obtained less than a high school degree and those who obtained a high school degree or higher. Now, some of our most significant results. First, at baseline, we saw, as compared to high school dropout, a high school graduate was half as likely to have low cognition. We also saw significant racial disparities in our data set, as Black people were 2.4 times more likely to have low cognition at baseline as white people, and this is accounting for other controls such as income and education in this case. Now, for trajectories of cognitive decline, we also saw that lower education was a significant predictor for decline to lower cognition. As compared to high school dropouts, high school graduates were a quarter less likely, and college graduates were a third less likely to decline to low levels of cognition. We also saw racial disparities in cognitive decline, as Black people were 1.5 times as likely to decline to low cognition. Now, the only measure where we did not see education was statistically significant was something called Adls, which are activities of daily living. These are activities such as walking and bathing without help. Now, the lack of relationship here likely reflects less of a dependence on cognition and more of a dependence on physical factors. So the implications of this study are the largest differences we saw in cognition and cognitive decline were between high school dropouts and high school graduates or higher. One important consideration for this cohort is that they were raised during the Depression and segregation, so many of the disparities we likely saw were exacerbated by the time period and the historical context. So future research should examine the aging cohorts as they continue and see if these disparities continue to persist. Now, some programs to potentially mitigate some of these differences could be Head Start for early childhood education, because this allows people to have a solid foundation of education and can significantly reduce high school dropouts later in life. Thank you for listening.